The Saris MTR bike rack has my favorite clamping style of any bike rack that I've used. It's also not going to be my go-to rack on a daily basis, and I'll tell you why coming up. I do want to thank Rack Attack for sending me this rack to review. If you're interested in this one or many other brands, check them out at rackattack.com. With this being my final review of the Saris MTR, I'm going to tell you the things that I really like about this rack and some things that I really don't like about this rack. So let's get into it. Starting off with something that I really like about this rack is how easy you can raise the arms. You can do it with one hand, which is very common because you have a bike in one hand and you come over and you need to load it. And so all you have to do is lift up on the silver metal tab with one hand, and you don't even have to grab and pinch it. All you have to do is push it and it raises up. Super easy. Literally, that's one of my favorite features about the rack. While we're on the subject of things that I really like about the rack, I like how these arms swing out of the way for when you're loading your vehicle. So if you're moving luggage in and out, and I mentioned this in my initial review, but that's a super handy feature. I also like how they swing out of the way for storing it in the garage. So it's really easy to just store the rack in a corner. You just fold the arms up and the rack takes up minimal space in your garage. Something else that I really like is how easy this handle is to operate. It's very smooth, easily one hand. I've had some racks where the handle was really tight, particularly my Yakima Dr. Tray. I had to take two hands. This one, like I said, is very easy to do with one hand. I'll load a bike so I can talk about a few more things that I really like about the rack. Again, super easy to raise those arms up and very easy to load a bike onto this. Absolutely nothing touches the frame or the fork or the cable retention device of your fork, unlike another rack that I've used, the Kuan Envy, which uses a clamping style that a lot of other racks use. But I still like the Kuan. I'm going to talk about that rack coming up because it's fair to do some comparisons with the clamping style that comes over the front tire. So again, nothing touching the frame or the fork. These wheel blocks, as Saris calls them in the instructions, only touch the tires, which I really like. I also have really come to like this, I call it a wheel block too, at the bottom where the front tire touches, because I think it keeps the bike pretty secure. It also allows you to undo the rear one without the bike falling over. So I can undo the rear, and then because there's a little bit of pressure up against that block, the bike doesn't fall over, so you can do it with one hand if you need to. As I mentioned in my first review of this rack, the wheel strap is included with the rack, but I don't use it if I'm just running down the road to my local trailhead. Where I use it is when I'm on the interstate and also if I'm on a bumpy road. And I think the advantage of it is to keep the bikes from really getting bucked upward if you were to hit a G-out or a bump where you could overcome the forces of this ratchet. All right, let's quickly load another bike and go for a drive test so I can show you how secure the bikes are on this rack. So I'm gonna quickly load, oh, wait, I can't quickly load it because I have to adjust the wheel block with a tool. All right, so you can tell I'm being a little bit sarcastic here because that is my absolute least favorite feature of this rack. You have to use a tool to adjust these. And that may sound minor, and it does only take about 2 minutes per tray, but when you're doing that several times during the week and times when you're in a hurry, I'm gonna go so far as to say it's poorly designed. So let's take a look and you can see what I'm talking about. So what you do is you set the wheel block for the front wheel. So the very top hole is for 29ers and 27.5 mountain bikes. The second from the top is going to be for road bikes, 26ers and gravel bikes. And then the hole right here is going to be for 24-inch BMX bikes. Saris says to use the bottom hole for 20-inch BMX bikes, but I found that for the front tire for a 20-inch BMX race bike, this hole works better, at least for the bikes that we have. Saris does include a little Allen wrench that's stashed back here, but it takes some effort and some pain on your fingertips sometimes to get this out. So, you know, if you're out and about and you need this wrench, then you definitely can reach back here and grab it. So you have to put the Allen wrench in here and turn it. It's nice that it does have a ball on one end so you can do it quickly. And again, you know, it's not like this takes a long time, but if you're doing this, you know, before you go to the BMX track and then when you get back, and then if you switch for a gravel bike and for a mountain bike, it's just something that kind of gets on your nerves. And Saris says for the rear wheel to have the wheel block as high as possible without coming over the center of the tire. Put the second bike on. Since I just gave the Saris some grief, let me talk about something that I really do like about this, and that is contact issues are pretty much non-existent for every bike combination that I've carried. So I've got the seat posts fully extended on both bikes, and because the second tray is stepped up higher, there is no contact between the handlebars and the saddle. Again, that's with any bike combination that I've used. Another thing I like about the rack is how easy it drops down to the very low position for raising your tailgate. So my tailgate comes up with no issues. I also dropped the rack down so I can easily put this Allen wrench back in. It's just a lot easier with the rack in the very low position. Now we're going to lift the rack up, put it in the drive position, and we're going to go for a drive so I can show you the stability of the bikes on the rack. Since we're going to go off-road a little bit, I'm going to put the wheel strap on, and I like how these are fabric. They're very easy to put on, and the reason I like the fact that they're fabric is they won't scratch the rim. I've had some plastic wheel straps, Yakima Dr. Trey in particular, that scratched a carbon wheel, just little surface scratches, but the fabric is going to be just fine. On my drive test here, I got the car going up to about 40 to 50 miles an hour, and the bikes held really securely. The wind was not moving the handlebars around, and when I went around turns, so I'm making a right-hand turn onto another street, and the bikes did not sway back and forth. Coming up here, I'm going to be going around some curves, going left and then going right, and the bikes held really well. I would say this bike rack probably holds bikes the most securely of any bike rack that I've used, even compared to the Kuan. So here I've got the car going off-road. This is really bumpy, like it's more bumpy than you can tell in the video, and the bikes did not bounce around. So there's no contact issues. I mean, the components aren't even close to each other, so even if the bikes did move around, you're not going to have, you know, handlebars hitting or shifters hitting. All right, now back in my driveway, I went off into the grass that was, again, very bumpy, and the rack actually moved around more than the bikes themselves on the rack. So even on bumpy roads, dirt roads, gravel roads, the rack is going to hold really well. Let's talk about the locks on this rack. First of all, it is nice that the rack includes locks for both bikes. There are some racks like the Velociracks, the 1-Up, that do not come with locks, so that is nice. The problem is you're working around the chainring. Now, this is not one continuous cable like you have on the Kuan. Now, I can't fault Saris for that because of the way the trays move. You cannot have one continuous long cable, so it's broken into two different pieces. The problem is when you're locking the bikes, you are working around the chainring, especially for the bike that's furthest back. The one that's closer to the vehicles, not as much of a problem. This is a common scenario. I'm on my way to work, I've got a dress shirt on, I need to run into the grocery store, I want to lock up the bike, and I've got to be super careful that I do not touch the chainring as I'm trying to lock up the bike. So the easiest way is to take this piece, slide it around, again being super careful that you don't touch the chainring with your shirt, and then locking it on. Now you also have to use the key to lock this. You've got to reach into your pocket, grab the key, lock it. There are other locks that I've used, like on the Kuan, where you don't have to do that. You just slide it in and you only have to use the key, obviously, to unlock it. Taking bikes off the rack is also very easy. Like I said before, I typically don't even use that rear wheel strap if I'm just running over to the trailhead. I've got the wheel trays folded up so I can store it in my garage like this, and that's what they look like. So let's talk about something else that keeps me from using this as my daily rack, and that is this pin underneath. So I really like the style of the Kuan where you've got a knob back here, and there are other bike racks like that. With the Kuan, all I have to do after I undo the lock is just slide the pin out, turn the knob, which takes about 5 seconds, and then slide the rack out. With this one, after I take the lock off, I have to rotate this pin, and you can see on my car it hits this. I think it takes me about 1.5 minutes to get this off. Again, it's not like it's that much time, and you know, I'm probably too busy, but anytime that I have to add another minute or two to a job, whether it's taking the rack on and off, moving those wheel blocks up and down, it's just taking time out of my day. So let's undo the lock. And then we'll loosen this, and you have to turn this, kind of move the rack back and forth to get it loose. And then you just have to rotate this. So like I said, the Kuat, I turn that knob for about 2 seconds and it comes out. This one takes a lot more turns, and I have to be careful because it hits that plastic. So it's just, you have to kind of keep rotating it the right way. So, you know, the threads keep the rack from moving around inside the hitch receiver, but I feel like the knob that has a little ball, or some of them have a little wedge, it just holds the rack a little bit more secure within that hitch receiver. Overall, the Saris MTR is a bike rack that I can recommend. There are a lot of really cool features about this rack that I've mentioned in this video, but there are 4 things that have me most likely going back to the Kuat Envy as my daily bike rack. First and foremost are these adjustable wheel blocks. I'm switching between a 29er mountain bike, a gravel bike, a BMX bike all the time, and so I would have to change these about 3 or 4 times during the week. And it's an annoyance that I think could have been resolved if there was some type of quick release on these. Now, yes, the Kuat Envy, you do have to put on an adapter to carry 24 and 20-inch bikes, but that thing literally takes like 10 seconds to put on. Now, if you're using a constant wheel size, this is a non-issue. The second thing is how long it takes to get this rack on and off the vehicle. It's about 2.5 minutes for this rack. The Kuat is about 40 seconds. I also like how accessible that knob is on the back of the Kuat versus reaching underneath to undo that pin. The third thing is the locks. So the locks on the Kuat are at the end of the tray, so you're not working around the chain ring, and you can put it between the wheel and the frame, and you don't have to use the key to lock it up. Another benefit of the locks on the Kuat is if you're only carrying one bike, you can actually use both locks to lock up the bike more securely. And finally, the fourth thing is something I haven't mentioned yet in this video, and that is how long it would take to convert this rack to a 3 or a 4 bike. With the Kuat, I have a 2 bike add-on, so I can make the rack a 4 bike rack really quickly. It takes 3 to 4 minutes to do that because there are only 3 bolts that you have to turn. Now, I thought about getting the add-on for this bike rack, but when I looked at what was involved, I realized it's not something you do for a weekend trip and convert it back to a 2. I estimated it would take about 15 minutes. You've got to remove the handle, you've got to put on these brackets, and there are about 8 or so bolts that you have to turn to make that happen. So again, the way I use the rack, I like it as a 2 most of the time, converting it to a 4 bike, maybe for a weekend trip, or if I'm going somewhere where I have to carry more than 2 bikes, and then converting it back to a 2 bike rack when I'm done. And that's something that's not quite as easily done on this bike rack. So as always, questions or comments that you have about this rack, about this video, drop those below. Thanks for watching.